All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the meeting. I'm going to be chairing in place of Chair Kettler, who's our Director Kettler, who's attending on Zoom today. So I want to begin by acknowledging that we're gathering today on the unceded traditional territories of the Comox First Nation, the traditional keepers of this land. And as we continue to read through the calls to action, I'm going to read call to action number 23. Which regards health. We call upon all levels of government to 1, increase the number of Aboriginal professionals working in the healthcare field, 2, ensure the retention of Aboriginal healthcare providers in Aboriginal communities, and 3, provide cultural competency training for all healthcare professionals. And we have a motion to go in camera. Thank you. All right, thanks. Moved and seconded. That's under sections 91A, 1E, 1K, and 2B. And so moved and seconded. All those in favor? No opposed? Okay, and Chair, I'm going to see, or Jesse, I'm going to, Director Kettler, let's try that. I'm going to assume that you're in favor unless you perhaps you can unmute and just vote verbally. But either way, it passes. So I'll now call for a motion for adoption of both sets of minutes, please. Okay, so it's minutes for the 18th and the 25th. And so it's been moved and seconded. All those in favor? Excellent. Thank you. And and next, we're going to be business arising from the minutes, a delegation, sorry. Business arising, it comes before delegations. I just wanted to confirm that. A follow-up on the delegation from the Comox Valley Cycling Coalition, and it's going to be an update by staff. So I'll just thank you for moving receipt and second, and all those in favor. Great. All right, and Alana Malawi, thanks.
And Mr. Chair, this is an opportunity here where staff will provide a brief statement on the agenda following a board meeting where there's been a delegation to try to ensure that if there is any follow-up that's needed, that the board can consider such actions. In this instance, Alana Malawi, our General Manager of Planning and Development Services, would be able to provide any current status on this particular delegation. Alana.
Great, thanks very much, James. Through the chair to the directors. As you likely know, we've worked closely with the Cycling Coalition over the years, particularly in the preparation of the Active Transportation Network Plan. These folks are a tremendous resource for us. They provide really, really important insight. And so we're keen to continue working with them on the implementation of the plan. So specifically in the last couple of days, we've conducted some site visits with our consultants and key members of the Cycling Coalition as we prepare that prioritization list for you that we hope to bring you. We will be bringing you in June. And that's where we take that big list of 40 active transportation network potential projects, distill it into a few for you to consider to identify as priorities. And then we'll put forward a budget in the financial plan for the design works and implementation. Thank you.
Okay, and I see a speaker, Director Arbor.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, and thanks for the brief update, and it'll be great to see that. I guess active transportation is one of those places where we have the least current ability to really fund this through any type of specific services, even though we've identified, millions of dollars in potential projects. And I note that I'm not aware that any of our jurisdictions or municipalities kind of look at the Growing Communities Fund a little bit for it, but probably not in light of the priorities that are going to come to us. So my question would be, when it comes back, will staff advise a little bit on the funding mechanisms that we can consider, maybe, and whether it would apply to this year or that would probably be for I imagine for future years.
Through the chair to the directors, absolutely. So funding these projects really is an exercise in itself. And, for us to make sure that we know what are the capital plans for each of the member municipalities, the Ministry of Transportation, so that ideally we can piggyback on other initiatives. So if folks are tearing up road in one place, we want to make sure that we're in there to look at options for creation of a new route. When senior government funds active transportation, typically it relies on a demonstration of that collaboration. So this is one of those areas where we will work to identify priorities that have something in the offing or potential. That was one of the criterion that we're using to assess priority.
All right, thanks. Any other questions from directors? Great. Okay, thanks so much. All right, and we've already voted on receipt, and we did, and I'll now take another motion for receipt for the delegation from UROC. Okay, thank you very much, and all those in favor? Great. Okay, so I'll invite Adam Spiegel, the president of UROC, and Dougal Brown, the executive director, to present to the board of directors. Just a second.
I just think it might be good to say what UROC stands for. Not every people may not all know that. Thanks.
It's not a tribute band.
That's an excellent point. We use far too many acronyms here, and I think it's a great one. But it's the United Riders of Cumberland. Welcome and thanks very much.
Hi, good afternoon. Is that working? Good. I'm Dougal Brown. This is Adam Spiegel.
Thank you.
I'm president and executive director, and Alex Blair is our treasurer. United Riders of Cumberland means the United Riders of Cumberland. Also, UROC means the United Riders of Cumberland. It's all about riding bikes. It's something that we did when we were all kids, and it's something that stays with us throughout our lives. And BC is one of the best places to ride a bike. We've got some amazing terrain and some incredible engagement in riding bikes, and it's become one of the leading places in the world to mountain bike. And Cumberland is the fifth busiest network in North America for mountain biking. I should mention we first would like to respectfully acknowledge that we all work, live and play on the unceded territory of the Comox First Nations. So a brief history about UROC. And I'll fire through this quite quickly. The map that you're looking at there is circa 2004. There were about 15 trails at that time. But in 1994, recreation trails started emerging in Cumberland and in and across BC. 2003, the first event was held in Cumberland for mountain biking. 2008, UROC was formed as a non-profit society with a volunteer elected board and no staff. By 2015, a relationship had been forged with the forestry companies for the private lands in and around Cumberland to have a land access agreement for non-motorized recreation on those private lands. By 2019, an executive director was appointed. 2020, a full complement of trail crews appointed. And by 2021, there was over 200 trails, over 200 kilometers of trails, over 6,500 acres of land, and a visitorship in 2021 of around 170,000 people to the 170,000 uses to the trail network. 2022 was we signed a long-term access agreement with the forestry companies and designed an MOU with the Village of Cumberland, which knits together as a three-part document or three-part agreement for access. In 2023, we hired an events coordinator, so the enormous growth. Who owns the land? Well, the land that UROC negotiated these land access agreements is the colored area that you see on that map. Manulife Investment Management owns the red space. The lighter green space is Mosaic Forest Management. And then the Village of Cumberland owns the other parts of land there, the darker green and the blue, which is two parts. It's municipal parklands, municipal forest parklands,
and then the rest is watershed, water supply. So the trails cross different boundaries, cross different ownerships, use different land types and areas. It's a lot to manage. Our key function is to accountability and maintain and administer the land agreement between those parties. Is this a public amenity? We think so. 200 trails reach approximately 200 kilometers, 6,500 acres. All the trails are managed and mapped and designated with difficulty ratings and zoned in such a way that they all have continuity and relationships between the trails. So liability is at lower risk. We had over 220,000 visits in 2022, and that number is growing, an average of 20% per year. During COVID, we were 170,000 people, or 170,000 visits, which would say to us that that was community, direct community in the Comox Valley. We have over 2,000 members, and that's growing, and our support has been overwhelming. We've connected 32 trails, existing trails, where we've edited them somewhat to afford adaptive use and an inclusive nature. We do 15 annually. We do 15 women's rides, which affords 580 participants. We do multiple school programs with the Community School Society, after schools programs, Ride, Dig, Ride programs. We do a lot of inclusion to youth engagement. And we hold a number of events every year as well for running, biking, triathlete events. Those are hosted on the trails, and then UROC has their own events, which affords 1,500 participants a year. And then the other events, over 3,500 people. Survey information shows that it's a tourism catch as well. People spending up to $80 a day in the Comox Valley when they come to visit the trails. That's not including accommodation. You could probably add $120 on that per night if you're including accommodation. So is it a public amenity? We think so. It's a big draw, and it's a wonderful asset. And as I remind you, it's one of the 5th busiest networks in North America. So on the Cumberland doorstep. What are we doing to manage that asset over the next 3 to 5 years? There are 3 strategic goals: to maintain and enhance the existing high quality network of trails. They were organically built by volunteers. There's a little bit of lack of continuity between the trails, and we're working very hard to connect them, to create interlinking zones. We are also looking to optimize the trail network to create the best possible user experience. Everybody is in the forest for different reasons, whether they're walking, hiking, running, biking, with family, with friends, out for a rip, out for a soft, gentle ride, out for a weekend jol. There's lots of reasons people go to that forest to enjoy the forest. And it's good for mental well-being, and it's good for our public health. And we're reducing risk and user conflicts. With 220,000 uses in the year, there's obviously people there who are going for different reasons. So we need to make sure that bikes aren't hitting runners, and runners aren't getting in the way of dogs, and dogs aren't, et cetera, et cetera. You get my meaning. So we're working hard with reducing conflict. And there are numerous peripheral aspects of the land access agreement that we need to administer to feature in our goals and objectives for the next few years. Our strategic objectives in 2023 and beyond, we're looking to develop a multi-year financial funding plan seeking long-term stability. The organization has grown somewhat, and the usership has grown dramatically, and we need to solidify our future. We are developing a plan on how UROC is going to manage and organize our races and events. It's one of our key funding streams, and it's also one of our key ways of engagement. Increased focus on interested parties, including membership and community engagement. It's always important. Continued focus on governance and organizational development as the organization grows and more people get involved, and there's a lot of passion. We need to make sure that we're doing it right. and continue the execution and delivery of the existing plans and programs and policies, the land access agreement, the strategic trails plan, our strategic plans ourselves, communications plan. There are all these factors that we've put work into that we want to deliver on. Our current cost pressures are the significant increase in use in the trail use. We've had an increased wage bill for maintenance and upkeep. With the amount of people going in there, there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And we have a fully staffed trail crew who are in there doing that. Fuel, materials, tools, and equipment, they never seem to go on sale, even after Christmas. We would like to see some assistance with that. Everything is more expensive than it ever has been. The insurance of the land access agreement is in and around $30,000 plus minus $30,000 a year for a nonprofit to find that funding. To put out $30,000 at the beginning of the year and every year is a hard task, but we always manage to do it somehow. Climate change is impacting our trails. The old Pineapple Express has evolved into another beast of the atmospheric river, and the atmospheric river has a lot of damage on trails. Our winters are getting longer, and freeze thaw and trail use is becoming a problem. So there's a lot of work that needs to go into that. Population growth and the draw to the valley. There's no denying that Comox Valley is an awesome place to live. It's a really fun place to live, and there's a lot of people moving from the mainland who are youth, young families, retirees. The west coast of Vancouver Island is a big draw. So there is growth, and one of those growth factors is the draw to the trails, to Mount Washington, to being able to surf and ride bikes and do all those fun things that people like to do. Are we an economic driver? We believe we are. Mountain biking and trail tourism in BC is coming to the forefront of people's minds, and Cumberland being one of the leading locations in Canada is very much on that radar. As I mentioned, people are spending up to $80 a day, excluding accommodation, when they come to visit the trails. Most but all accommodation exists in Courtney Comox. There are minimal beds in Cumberland. There are some Airbnbs and there's no hotel, and there's a youth hostel or a hostel. But a lot of that draw comes to Courtney Comox. 4VI's strategic approach is to specifically invest in trails and in mountain biking. So that's just something to note. Increasing bike industry is emerging in Comox Valley. There's a bike manufacturer, there's a wheel manufacturer, there are 6 very successful bike stores. There are 2 or 3 very successful trail running stores. That's quite an industry that's emerging. A lot of the captains of industry, of the bike industry, are moving from Squamish, Pemberton, Whistler, and they're coming to the Comox Valley, and you'll see that this industry is growing. Tourism in 2022 recovered significantly, but it's still a fifth behind the levels of 2019. So if we saw a growth of 170,000 users during COVID, and we've sustained that growth, and 2022 still hasn't hit the mark of where we were at 2019, given that we got 220,000 users in 2022, we're probably heading towards 250,000 users next year or this year, which is somewhat of a scary number. So I've given a comparison example here with the Comox Valley Aquatic Center, the investment into that, and what the Cumberland Trail Network is as a public amenity. They have similar attributes that promote public health, good health, fitness, activity for all, trails, including being outdoors. The Aquatic Center gets 350,000 users a year. The trails, 220,000 users a year. The Aquatic Center is looking for development of tens of millions of dollars, and we're asking for no development for tens of millions of dollars for new development. But our running costs in 2022 was in and around $400,000 to maintain and manage this whole network. And we ended our year on a deficit last year. Everything is rising, all costs are rising, visitorship is rising, the amount of people coming is rising. And we were armed. We thought we were armed well for the year to get through the year without running a deficit, but we weren't. We didn't make it. So the CBDRD's contribution to us is $25,000, 6.25%, which has been the same since 2018. And the Village of Cumberland's contribution is $13,000 a year, which is 3.25%. And that's been the same for several years. And another cost comparison that I've given you, which is the reason I've used the city of Rossland is very much similar as Cumberland, where the trail network is immediately on the doorstep of that village, of that community. That's quite a rarity to have a trail network immediately on the doorstep of a town or a village. And mostly you have to drive there, but in this case, we don't. We can step out of the door. Rossland gets $26,000 from their local municipality, and then from the regional district, they get $85,000. So at the beginning of their year, they start their year with $111,000 for their network of trails. And their network of trails is not fifth busiest network of trails in BC, and it's not affording 220,000 users a year. So what's our ask? I know we're late to the party. You've done your financial planning, but we are asking for an increase in our funding. We're at the moment we're $25,000. We're looking for an increase in that funding, and what we're asking for is $50,000. How we would spend that is in the maintenance and maintaining the access agreement and meeting the access agreement conditions. It would directly support the trail crew and improve the rider and user experience for this public amenity. It would allow us to challenge the climate change in the trails and start building sustainable trails that are a little more robust and able to afford the visitorship and the impact of climate change. And it would assist in our insurance expenses, which continue to rise year on year. If these funds aren't available in this cycle, we would look for answers or ways to collaborate. And what else can the CVR do to support us in terms of partnerships, in terms of access to other funding opportunities, getting some relationships going, and perhaps lobbying to senior levels of government for more funding towards trails and parks. And given that we're on private land, that may be complicated, but we exist and we're one of the best. So we would like to open those relationships or open those conversations. And what will we need to do to ensure that CVRD are able to provide more funding to us in the future? Is the last question that I'd like to pose. So that's all the words I'd like to say. Adam wanted to have a couple of words.
Thank you for your time. I just want to highlight that, kind of rehash some of what Dougal's talked about. This is a multi-use trail network. UROC manages this multi-use trail network on behalf of the community for all trail users, trail runners, trail walkers, mountain bikers, amongst other things. And so, cat's out of the bag. We already know people are moving here. Many of them are moving here because of community amenities and assets like this trail network. And it's not just individual families that are relocating here. We are seeing a significant number of businesses that are relocating here because of the close proximity to the trail network. These are mountain biking industry companies. This is rec tech. This is tourism. And there's a significant economic benefit to these companies relocating here and forming here. It's not just tourism. Outside of economic benefits, there's a significant social benefit. This trail network provides countless opportunities for people to connect with others, to recreate, to improve their health and well-being. UROC has dedicated a significant amount of our resources to making this trail network more accessible for all types of users, not just able-bodied. And this trail network is open 24/7, 365 days a year for people to use. Think about that. How many other recreational amenities in this community have that type of access? So I challenge the regional district and all forms of government to rethink the way that trails are funded. We need to start thinking about them the same way that we look at other recreational amenities in our communities. And if we do that, change our mindset, we can achieve this paradigm shift. I think we can get much better value for the dollars that we spend. As Dougal's highlighted, there is significant cost pressure currently being borne on the backs of UROC, whether it's insurance, wage costs, materials. The current system is unsustainable, which is why we're coming to you. And I apologize that we're a little bit late to the game, but things have changed and things have changed rapidly. I do want to highlight that we are incredibly grateful for the contributions that the regional district has made. The $25,000 for the last 5 years has helped to provide a solid platform for us to build off of in every year for the last 5 years. And we wouldn't have been able to achieve what we've achieved without that type of contribution. So I'm here with an immense amount of gratitude that I want to express to the regional district. But going forward, we do need additional resources to be allocated to us. And it's not all just money. There's a huge amount of opportunities for other types of resources and opportunities for collaboration between not-for-profit societies like ours and the regional district. So with that, I'll leave it there, and I'll open it up to any questions that any of the directors might have. Great, thanks Adam, and thanks Dougal. And we've got a number of lights here, so we're going to start off with Director Arbor.
Yeah, thanks, Chair, and thanks to UROC for coming to present. And my background, I represent the South area, so from Royston to Fanny Bay, but my home community for years was Hornby Island, and I was the Economic Development Officer there. And when I was there, we anchored our economic strategy around mountain biking and weddings. So you're kind of preaching to the converted in terms of understanding the value that it provides, and I'm glad you bring the economic argument. And I wonder, I wish you were there. We did a strategic session at the Recreation Commission, and I think I was forwarding a lot of similar arguments with our group. In terms of, I would say there can be a little bit more credit to the CBRD than the 25,000 a year. I agree that was nice, but I would add for your knowledge that even though it's a little bit indirect through our water service and otherwise, we actually help with significant land purchases in the Persevering Creek corridor. So there's hundreds of thousands of dollars in partnership with Cumberland Community Forests and the village that went towards securing some of the lands that the trails are on over the last 4 years. So that's just an additional one. I would also say that I agree that the model is the same on Hornby, the model for funding it. We have a lot of experience with trails as a region because we manage, and municipalities as well, because we manage parks, right? So when you think about parks and say the landfall systems or all that, we definitely appreciate the value for money that you can get from that, and how to extend that into the future. To me, we should look at that as a board, and in looking at how we can better support your efforts. There's watershed conservation, there's recreation values, there's the active transportation link. You heard us do a little briefing on that, but how people, I know that parking is starting to be an issue for the mountain biking and boating and all the rest of that in Cumberland. So if we can get more people to bike to destination, so that there's just multitude ways that I think we could grow the partnership. But the most obvious one is probably I think to keep talking about that recreation grant. If you want to think really big, and I'm getting ahead of myself here, maybe my colleagues will damper me a little bit, but we have just launched the regional parks and trails service, and strategic planning is kickstarting around that. So I encourage you to at least stay attuned of how that whole discussion evolves. And if you want to provide some inputs, of course, you're more than welcome.
All right, thanks, Director Arbor. And next I have alternate Director Midians.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Adam and Dougal, for the presentation. That's interesting to see some of that impressive and probably frightening growth at times. That's a lot of moving parts that your society is having to deal with. So thank you for your work on that. I'm just curious, out of the 220,000 visits per year, is there an idea of how much of that is local ridership and how much is coming from tourism? I spent about 4 years in Cumberland and really did notice like the businesses in Courtenay and Comox also seeing people visit their communities, but I'm curious if there's a number, and I apologize if I missed it there, but approximately how much is tourism based and how much is local ridership?
So the trail counters can't differentiate between somebody from Courtenay versus somebody from Cumberland. They all look the same as they pass the counter. What we do know is the number of members and that are from Courtenay, the different areas within the regional district and Comox, as well as Cumberland. And so we can differentiate based on that and then make assumptions, extrapolate. We have done some studies in the past where we've taken sample sizes to determine approximately, but that data is old. So I think it speaks to maybe some of the efforts that we should all be looking at, which is to look at a full-blown economic impact assessment where we can better quantify where people are coming from and who's using the network, and then obviously the trickle-down effect that has on our communities.
I can say a couple of things on that as well. We can thank COVID for one thing, which is pre-COVID, we were 136,000 users in 2019, and then come 2020, we were about the same, about 10,000 more people, and that was just community because no one was moving around. Come 2021, we were 176,000 users, and that was just Comox Valley community. So that indicates to you that a lot of people were going there. Now, one user, I might use the trail network 200 times in that year. So that's not a person, that's a use. So 176,000 uses in 2021. Then the doors opened up in 2022 and we saw 220,000. So it was a big spike. A lot of word got out, excuse me, a lot of word got out that the Cumberland network has been worked on really hard in the last few years. The trails are amazing, and tourism just, I don't know if it was us that was responsible for that, but if we take the 176,000 users from 2021, look at it at 2022, we've got a 50,000 differentiation there. We could probably say that that's probably visitors. People from South Island, people from Nanaimo, people from a little bit further away, and people from the mainland. We don't get a huge amount of international visitors, I don't think, but that's just my speculation. I can't tell you what that is. So we can thank COVID for that.
Great, thanks. And next I'll hand it over to Director Grieve.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you guys for coming and presenting to us. We were talking earlier on acronyms, UROC. I would maybe suggest that you put 2 C's at the end of UROC, because actually out of that 6,500 acres out there, a lot of that's actually in Area C, not Cumberland. So just a bit of a joke. When you first, Mike Manera, yeah, was it Mike? Yeah, when he first came to this board, the cities kind of turned him down because they didn't see any kind of economic spin-off to this. It was such a bunch of people up there riding bikes. But at the time we have what we call a rural community grant, which we used to be our grant and aid, and I managed to scrape together like $11,000 just to keep it going, and then eventually it became part of a function. Now I'm going to ask staff: Is this 600 function 600?
Yeah, you're asking which service the funds to United Riders comes out of, and it's function 600, the recreation grant service. Okay,
so that's doable because that's paid into by the whole area, pretty much. Not Denman and Hornby though, right? I don't think. A little bit? No. So anyway, so there's opportunity there with the function 600. It's sort of an afterthought rec that fits all the other pieces kind of fit into. So I'm thinking there's probably a good opportunity there to apply. I don't know if we can do it retroactively or not, but certainly failing that, you know, there's always next year. Now, I was going to ask about senior government grants. You're obviously a registered nonprofit, so you're eligible. Is there any money out there from the feds or the province?
So currently we've been receiving the gaming grant that has helped with operating costs, but primarily the funding opportunities through the federal and provincial governments have gone to supporting capital projects, which have been important in improving and continuing to manage the trail system. But in terms of
not operations,
yeah, it's
the old story.
As you always know, right? Like it's easy to find, or it's easier to find funding for the large capital projects. It's harder to find the operational funding, which is where I think the opportunity is for the municipality level to get involved and support our organization.
Well, I would mention that when you talk about economic spin-offs, there's a group right now that's looking for retention and attraction of physicians to the Comox Valley. Well, you can pretty well guess what their number one draw is. It's the mountain biking.
The Division of Family Practice. Is that what you're referring to?
Yes, well, they're just physicians in general.
Yeah,
It's a committee, but it's a real big one for people coming here if they can only afford to buy a house. Thanks so much for coming.
Yeah. Thanks for having us. Great, thanks, Director Grieve and Director Hillian.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks very much. First off, I totally support us giving you whatever we can to help your operations. I think that you're providing an amazing opportunity both for recreation and for connection with the outdoors. I didn't hear you say much about your actual business model, and I know you're a membership organization. You talk about having a couple of thousand members, and I'm just curious. How many of those members would be actually paying full dues? And I mean, I know my son goes mountain biking in Cumberland just about every weekend. He's 33 and has all sorts of friends who've moved to this area for the exact reasons that you note. But I'm not aware that he actually pays anything. Do you have to pay to use the trails? And how do you in fact monitor that?
So the trails are something that we firmly believe should be accessible to everyone, regardless of their economic capacity. And so the trails are free to use. We encourage everyone to become a member and engage with us. And by becoming a member and paying their dues, it does form a portion of our financial plan. And so the way we look at it is there needs to be a certain number of buckets that we look at, or revenue streams. And so when I break it down, really it's a way that we can all ensure that we're sharing in the financial funding that the trails deserve. So in simplest forms, it's membership. And I believe last year we generated somewhere in the range of about $50,000 in revenues from our members. So those people that are actively using the trail network, they're sharing in the cost of maintaining the trails. We have municipal and regional district funding that comprised, as Dougal talked about 6.5% of our total revenues last year from the regional district and 3.5% from municipality of Cumberland. We also have sponsorship. So that's generally it's local businesses that are stepping to the table and saying, we see value in what you guys are doing. We're going to provide cash donations or cash funding to maintain these trails. Some of them it's in kind. We also have events, so that's internal activities that we're doing to generate revenues. I do want to highlight a number of our programs, specifically youth programming. We run at no cost to the users. So it's not a revenue program. We don't even have a cost recovery basis program for that. It's just a net benefit for the community. Merchandise. So through the sale of UROC branded merchandise, maps, etc. would be the other bucket. And then what am I missing here?
That's great. You don't need to go any further. I just really appreciate getting that picture, and please be assured that I'll be talking to my son and his pals to make sure that they've got their memberships.
Thank you very much.
It's $30, which is $2.50 a month. Pretty good. Yes. Yeah. Well.
Great, thanks. And I'll pass it over to Director Morin.
Great, thank you. Yeah, thanks so much for everything that your organization does to help maintain the trails and all the other things that you've talked about. I guess I had a couple comments around the impact from COVID and what we heard during that time, that our local trail systems and communities were inundated. Of course, provincially, parks were being shut down, and we had no way to shut down, close our doors per se, and it did have a huge impact. And I really kind of feel that conflict between wanting accessibility and not putting, you know, sort of a user fee on folks, but then that also that balance of kind of lightening the impact. And I know that 4VI has been talking a lot around those principles around sort of sustainable tourism. And I guess I'm curious. I mean, you're growing and growing in terms of usership of the trails, and at what point do you kind of, I mean, is it sustainable to just keep, you know, build it and they will come sort of idea? I mean, we've seen music festivals across North America, you know, go crazy with people, and it has huge impacts to the community. And our local music fest has kept it to a certain number of people and hasn't allowed it to expand, even though there could be more economic benefit coming in. So I guess I'm wondering about your comments around kind of the balance between the benefits that we see, and obviously to the people using the trail, but also that the impacts that we see to the community. I would also mention that I've agreed with Director Grieve and others when we've talked about recreation and our recreation services, that I think we do need to start looking at outdoor recreation more than just bricks and mortar. So I certainly am supportive of us, you know, doing more in that regard, expanding our definition of recreation as local government. But just curious about how you're kind of balancing those aspects of the impact to the trail system and the surrounding community, as well as wanting accessibility and more people to enjoy the area. Thank you.
Great question. Thank you. So I think when we look at sustainability and how we manage this trail system, I don't think it necessarily means you are going out and actively building a whole bunch of new trails. Our focus on new trail development has been around connectivity. So how do we move more people through the network more evenly? How do we improve the user experience as opposed to building a whole bunch of new trails? The new trails primarily that are being built right now are built by volunteers. And those are people that were, prior to UROC, illegally building trails. So through a vetted process, we now have better trails. We've skilled up these individual volunteers by delivering workshops on sustainable trail design. So they're having less environmental impacts on the environment as they're building these trails. And these trails actually require less physical maintenance in the future. And so that to me is how we sustainably manage a trail system. You know, we're seeing some challenges around, so an example would be parking. I think it's actually just an opportunity for us to re-envision how people access the trail network. And if we can dedicate resources to figuring out how do we make it so that other areas of the trail network are attractive for users to access as a trail hub or a point of entering into the network, I think it's a pretty easy solution. We can solve problems like that. But it takes us coming together as a community, having these discussions and looking at these problems more like opportunities. Great, thanks. And last speaker is Director Grant.
Yeah, thank you. So I love the trail network you guys have out there. You've done a really great job. I know tons, I've ridden them myself over the years, but I know tons of people that use them all the time. But I think one of the issues that you run into when you come in here is the funding models and the difference between the municipalities and the regional districts. For example, in Comox, we have all our own trails, rec centers, we have a marina. Like you can imagine if we went to Cumberland and said, hey, you want to give us $1 million a year for the marina? The answer would be no, right? And so when you look at the difference between how it gets funded in different areas, we have to pay for all of those things ourselves within our own municipality. We don't get any help from the regional district on any of it. So I think the problem becomes the funding model, right? It's how it's actually structured and how you do it. And so it's really hard for us to go and say, okay, we're going to give the regional district and the Village of Cumberland money for trails when we don't get reciprocated on the other things. And I know Courtney has a lot of things that they pay for as well that don't. And so, the devil is in the detail here in finding a way to make that funding model work for everybody. So I think that that's been the challenge over the years. I don't think it's because, as Edwin says, there's no economic spin-off. It's the fact that we're already bearing the burden for a lot of the payment of all sorts of different functions already in the municipalities. And so it's really difficult for us to look at it and say, well, let's get involved in something else. There's also a difference between shared services like you see with with arenas and such too, where we all share in that service, and so we all pay. And you guys are not falling into that category, or at least you're not right now. And so that's another hard, those are the details that need to get worked out to make that work for you. So anyway, those are just my thoughts.
Yeah, thank you. I think you highlight that the individual residents of the Comox Valley don't see physical boundaries. Someone that uses these trail networks, they're coming from all of the different communities in the Comox Valley, and many of them are using active transportation to access these amenities. And so to me, it's just we need to re-envision our system and how we fund these assets that are used by everyone in the valley, regardless of who they pay their taxes to. All right, we have one more speaker, and Director Hardy.
Yeah, thanks. I'm just wondering, the question's more, I guess, directed towards staff in regards to, again, just understanding the request from UROC in regards to, is it a tourism or destination marketing type service? If I understand correctly, the CBRD kind of contracts out the tourism and destination marketing to another entity that's not here in the valley. I'm just wondering if that might be, an approach for these folks here, is to go and try and work with whatever contractor we have that's working on tourism destination marketing. Thanks.
If I can, yeah, maybe a couple of different responses there. One, the way that the CVRD currently helps to fund United Riders of Cumberland is through the Function 600. That's the recreation grant service, and there are a number of different recipients within that service across the Comox Valley in recreation that is outside of the traditional pools and arenas and playing fields and the turf and the track and that. So that recreation grant service, I don't have the details with me, and if the board's interested, we could provide an update on what the funding was for that service that we've just finished in our financial planning. And to date, historically, that has been the source of funding for the United Riders of Cumberland. It hasn't fallen under any other service like the tourism service, as you mentioned. To answer your question in a second way, we do have a tourism service, and we contract with 4VI. formerly known as TVI, I think, 4VI, and they undertake the tourism management, tourism destination marketing activities in the Comox Valley on behalf of the CVRD. And so they're also partnering with the hoteliers, with the there's a partnership with Mount Washington Corporation. So they're partnering to market and enhance and provide tourism opportunities. I think I saw in the presentation some reference to TVI, and so there is a connection there between TVI and the United Riders. And as well, and we'll see this in a coming board meeting, TVI, we're working with them on undertaking a tourism strategy for the Comox Valley that will look at some of the values and principles that the Comox Valley, that the regional district wants to see with its partners, with the municipalities in developing a tourism strategy for the coming years with respect to tourism. It may or may not have overlap with some of the interests like what United Riders brings to us. But that is where TVI and tourism comes in.
So I'm just going to pass it back to Director Hardy. Sorry if I got your.
Thanks. And again, not to be combative or controversial or anything, but I have said, forums where I've heard different folks say that we don't want any more people coming to the Comox Valley because of the impacts upon our trails, whether they're in a park or a bike or whatever. So I'm just trying to, again, understand that message in regards to what our friends here from UROC are providing information to us on. So again, just taking that into account with regards to us moving forward. I do understand the importance of the trails and the mental wellness that it brings to different folks. And obviously I would like to see some help for these folks moving forward. And that's why, again, I asked the question with regards to when we start talking about tourism or destination marketing, is there avenues for staff to help out with regards to approaching tourism Vancouver Island and trying to promote this area? Or do we want this area to be promoted? Because like I said, I've heard that side of the fence as well, as we don't want to promote the Comox Valley. We don't want any more people coming to the Comox Valley and using our trails, which I think is not a good mindset, but that's just my own opinion. But like I said, I just really wanted to ask that question with regards to tourism Vancouver Island, and if that's a route or an avenue for these folks to go and visit.
So just to be clear, our partnership with 4VI is limited to a couple of capital projects that they've funded as part of the COVID recovery program. So those, I believe, 3 specific trail projects. We have actively communicated to 4VI as well as others that we are not actively promoting the trails outside of the community. I think we have to be careful with promoting this amenity prior to us ensuring that the amenity is managed in a sustainable way. And so, but like I said, the cat's out of the bag. The Comox Valley is on the map. People are coming here regardless of whether we promote the community or not and this trail amenity. So the challenge is just, do we want it to be managed well, or do we want it to just degrade? And I think we all know the answer. Okay, and I'll just pass it now to, sorry, Director Hardy, did you have something further you want to say? I guess.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I guess the message I got from the presenters was the fact that it was kind of endorsing tourism and the amount of dollars that were coming into the Comox Valley because of the trails. So I'm a little confused as to the message here then.
Yeah, I can clarify that. So we acknowledge that this recreational amenity for our community has a compounding effect on tourism, but we're not, and it specifically states in our mandate and our constitution, we do not participate actively in tourism and economic development. Okay, so there's a spinoff, but we are not actively marketing economic development or tourism.
Again,
Thanks. I think this is perhaps something we can, as you probably know, we don't make decisions on the evening and the delegation arrives. We have discussion on a future evening. I think we can probably dig more into these issues when we have that opportunity to talk amongst ourselves at an upcoming meeting. I think the final speaker this evening on this will be Director Arbor.
Yeah, thanks. And I'll just contribute a little bit to the conversation because we ran into that exact problem on Hornby and Tourism Vancouver Island, Destination BC, and Mountain Biking BC for a number of years. They've actually ran a specific program for the entire province in support of promotion of mountain biking, not only here, but to other provinces and internationally. And what we discovered on Hornby, I'm sure it's the same Cumberland, is that the dial, like a little bit of publicity, brings a lot of people for a very small community. So when I hear the speaker, I don't see as much attention because what probably is the experience is if you market a bit, you're going to hit the carrying capacity quicker. And it's almost like these things are growing organically, fairly robustly without the additional marketing. So what I retained from the presentation today is really not as much of an ask for help with marketing or capital costs, but I heard an ask for some dilemmas anyways, not a precise ask, but a dilemmas around operations and how to sustain this in the long term so that both the environment and the experience and the pressure on the community and our broader community is felt in a good way rather than just overwhelmed or not well calibrated. So yeah, I don't know, I think back earlier, I haven't played soccer in 6 or 8 months, but I just think about the different fees that we charge. Like for our parks, same as you, we don't charge a user fee if somebody works at Nim Falls or Stone Falls. At the other end of the spectrum, if you want to ski around, you gotta fork out $1,000 or something for your pass. So there's probably discussions and even when you said the non-mandatory conversation with our park staff or otherwise, like some of the experiences as we try to calibrate that public value versus something that you don't have to run a deficit. I think that's what I'd like to see. And if there's a rationale, we can come back to this board in the next year or two around a better balance of local government contribution. I'm sure the board will look at it anyways. So I thank you very much for coming tonight. I think you guys do really good work.
All right, Adam and Dougal, thanks so much for the time you spent with us and for answering all of our many questions. So thanks so much. Thanks for receiving us. Thank you. Okay, so we're just moving on to reports and we have the 2022 financial statement from audit findings report. Can I get a motion for receipt? Okay, that's moved and seconded. And at this point, we'll hand it off to Corey Vanderhorst online.
I think actually I'll turn the microphone over to Jennifer Nelson.
That's a better idea. Okay,
And
thanks.
Jennifer has a brief presentation. Jennifer is our manager of financial operations and will introduce Lucy isn't. Lucy, are you leading the presentation?
You tell.
Yeah, Lucy Wacharek, our chief financial officer, will be introducing this report.
Thanks very much through the deputy CAO, through the chair, to directors today. Good afternoon. I'm just going to do a very brief introduction here, and then we'll follow through with the rest of our presentation. So I'm very pleased to be here today to deliver the CVRD annual audited financial statements. The presentation today will involve staff and our audit partner, MMP, Corey Vanderhorst, who's on the line today. I would just like to take a moment to introduce to you Jennifer Nelson. Jennifer has joined our financial services branch in the term position of manager of financial operations, and she'll present to you the statements today. Jennifer's covering for Katie Powell, who is currently on maternity leave. And I would just like to take a minute before we get going today to recognize Katie. What you see here in these consolidated statements is Katie's work, and Jennifer and I, with the assistance of two of our staff who are here at the back, Jason and Kelly, will help us to communicate the results to you. I'd like to also just take a minute to thank the entire financial services team for all their hard work over the last 3 months. There are a lot of moving pieces that go into bringing these statements to you today. And everybody plays a really important role in getting this all pulled together. The presentation will be just a little different than prior years, and I'll just touch on that just really quickly for a minute. The presentation of annual statements is the responsibility. The preparation of annual statements is the responsibility of management. And as staff, we've pulled these statements. We bring these statements forward to you as the board for your approval. The board is required to appoint an external auditor. Staff support MNP with getting through their audit, and MNP is required to come back to the board with their independent report. In today's presentation, Jennifer will present the year-end statements, and then she'll pass things over to Corey, who will deliver the MNP finding report. Presentation will take about 15 minutes, and we can answer any questions after Corey has finished his part. As board members, what is likely most useful to you is our internal reports associated with budget, financial planning that's often broken out by services. Financial statements are prepared on that consolidated basis and must be in accordance to public sector accounting. And I understand they look very different than what we usually bring you when we bring you financial information in our budgets. The statements are a real important piece of governance over public funds, and they show us some real key pieces of financial health. And it's those really high level points that Jennifer will point out to you in this presentation. And with that, I'll just pass it over to Jennifer to begin.
Thank you, Lucy. Yeah, so as Lucy mentioned, these are consolidated financial statements. So it involves all the operations and services of the CVRD are rolled up into these. This year, we did provide you with a little more detail in the report. So the report in your agenda, pages 3 through 5, we've included a table, and it gives you a little bit of a variance analysis over 2021. So I won't go through that in detail with you. This presentation is really just going to focus high level on the 5 statements, give you a couple of comments on each, and then I'll hand it over to Corey. So starting with the statement of financial position, this is on page 6 of the appendix. This is a snapshot of the assets, liabilities, and surpluses for the CVRD. And this first slide is just focusing on the top portion of that statement, the financial assets. And here you can see there is a reduction of $19.3 million over last year. And that's primarily due to the significant acquisitions of capital assets throughout the year. I'm just gonna. Okay. And the second portion of this statement are the liabilities, and these are future obligations of the CVRD. So overall, this section, the liabilities have reduced by $6 million. And this is largely due to the change in the provision for the landfill closure and post-closure liability. You can see that significant reduction there. And so that's driving the lower amount in 2022. I hit the wrong button to change the slide. Okay. All right. And this last portion of the statement is the non-financial assets. So your tangible capital assets, sometimes referred to as TCA, and you can see that significant balance there of $325 million. That is up $37 million over last year and includes $47.4 million in acquisitions, offset by $10.6 million in amortization last year. So let's move on. And here we have, this slide just gives you a summary of the annual surplus for the year. And there you can see the value of reserves, $72 million, and that is reduced from last year by 12.9 million. And that's largely due to pulling funds from the capital works reserves to fund some of those capital projects. And then again, if you look down to the bottom of the slide there, that landfill closure and post-closure liability, that you can see how that is coming out of your accumulated surplus, that significant 14.9 million. And that estimate is significantly down over last year. And one of the main reasons for that is the Campbell River closure, the landfill that was closed in 2022. So if we look last year, the estimated value of that liability was at 15 million. And then after closure, it's now estimated at only 4 million. So that's what drove that reduction. And just to note that the CVRD does rely on a third-party professional consultant that does these calculations for us each year, and then we incorporate that into our statements. Okay, and then the next statement is the statement of operations. So this is on the next page 7 of the financial statements. This is just a very high level summary of just to point out the annual surplus in the year. It was at 25.5 million. Last year it was 28.9. And again, more of the details found in the report. I won't go through the table, but we have highlighted with a couple of graphs to just give you a visual of where some of those significant variances occurred this year. So this graph here depicts the revenues by function. So if you look at the dark blue bars, those are the 2021 revenues, and then the teal or green is 2022. So just noting there some of those significant variances. One is the recreation and cultural. You can see that's a really big driving force behind that surplus. And that is, as we encountered back to normal operations coming out of COVID, so there's increased program registration. We start to see that uptick in revenues coming in, as well as the CVRD received a significant contribution of land. And our accounting standards require that when we take in those donations, we have to record the value as revenue in the financial statement. So that's incorporated there. And then the other one, environmental health, you can see that swing there. That is related to some grants that were received for the organics facility. Again, we've provided one for the expenses side too, and I'll just touch on the two that stand out with the swings there. In water services, you can see expenses are up significantly over 2021. And that's largely driven by the new water treatment plant into operation. We had to record a full year of amortization this year. So that's driving that increase. And again, with the increased programs offering and registration and recreation, we also see the expenses to provide the program going up in 2022. And the rest of the expenses stayed fairly in line with previous years there. So. Okay, and then this next statement is the statement of change in net debt. And you can see the CVRD is in a net debt position of 25 million. This just gives you a reconciliation of surplus to that value at the end. And really your net debt is your financial liabilities subtracted from your financial assets. And so that's how that number is calculated. And you can see that significant acquisition of capital assets in that reconciliation in that statement. This next statement is the statement of remeasurement losses. This is a new statement this year, and this is the result of adopting a new accounting standard, 3450 financial instruments. And so what this new standard requires is that there's certain investments with the Municipal Finance Authority, or MFA, that have to be recorded at the fair market value at a point in time at the end of December 2022. And then any unrealized gains or losses need to be reported separately on this statement. So we're not we're not recognizing a loss until money is actually pulled out of the fund. So it's important to note that this is just really for transparency to see what the value of those investments would be if we were to do that. So this $2 million sits on this statement. If we were to pull those funds, it could be at a gain or a loss. We would then run it through the financial statement of operations at that point. And then finally, the last statement and the last slide in our presentation is the statement of cash flows. And this overall, you can see there was a change or a negative cash flow of $17.5 million in 2022. And that again is the driving force behind that is the cash used to purchase capital assets throughout the year. So I will leave it at that with my presentation and hand it over to Corey to present the audit findings.
Looks like we have a question, I think, on your presentation. Is that okay, Jennifer?
That's, yeah, sure.
Director Robert?
Thanks for indulging. I mean, not retain all my questions until Corey is done. So yeah, just 3 questions. So the remeasurement, that new instrument, am I correct? If I think in terms of capital markets, it's like the book value and market value, and a little bit like that we're attempting to reconcile as part of our books. Okay, I see some nodding. In terms of there was a huge jump, as you see, in recreation and cultural, and I think you mentioned on the revenue side, and I was like, okay, that's certainly not number of people that are going to the swimming pool, because there was a difference of almost $10 million. So you didn't state it, but would I be correct to say that might be the Maris Estate property if parks and recreation fit under recreation and cultural services, or is it that because it's fairly substantial difference?
Yes, that's correct. So we were required to report the value of that contribution of land as revenue in the financial statement. So in there is the uptick in program, but the main driving force behind that increased revenue was the contribution of that asset.
That one donation. Thank you. And I'll ask the same question to our auditor. So this is a test. Like, what's keeping you up at night in the finance department at the CVRD? If you were to look at this suite of statement, like, is there one area that you're a little bit more concerned around the trends?
Oh, were you talking? Okay. Maybe I'll let our CFO, Lucy, respond to that.
Thank you through the chair. To give you a brief answer over that, one of the main factors to zero in on in your statements is that net asset or net debt factor. So it's sitting there currently at a net debt factor, which, you know, I first go around with your budgets, et cetera. And I do have a bit of a gut feel around hopeful that we could potentially to the future not draw as much debt as we are. So it's an important piece to keep an eye on, because what that means is that's the value that is cash that we need to be raising to the future. So other than that, I have no other concerns. And what I'm seeing there, our analysis from a budget to an actual perspective is pretty bang on, and our other changes from year over year are very much explained. So it's just digging more into the level of debt.
Great, thanks. And I think at this point we are, Director McCollum, just a second.
Thanks for the presentation. And my question is maybe slightly off topic, but it's a good opportunity to bring it up. I just came from an MFA meeting, and seeing that we've committed another $1 million into investments, which judging from the financial notes, it looks like all of our investments are held by the MFA now. And sometime last year, or actually no, it's probably a few years ago now, we did pass a resolution to look at fossil fuel free investing in ESG. And I know that we haven't had that policy yet come back, but I'm just curious to know if there's what kind of decisions have been made around that recent investment, and if any of our new investments included fossil fuel free options.
Thank you, through the chair, and thank you for that question, Director McCullen. And I turned off my mic and said to myself, oh goodness, I forgot to say my little bit of my second piece, because we are holding a fair amount of cash. So as a very top priority for us, I just actually today finished what I consider to be a initial draft of a new investment policy that we'd like to be bringing forward early June. So the way that the investments are sitting there right now, there has not been any additional investments in what we're holding in MFA for quite some time. So a really good time to come back to this table and bring an update to that policy, and also start the conversations and incorporate any type of responsible investing that this board may want to do or start to incorporate in there. Having said that, there already is some responsible investing in there, but we're getting ready to be prepared to bring that back to this table in June.
All right, at this point, I think we're going to hand it over to Corey Vanderhorst, who's been waiting patiently for us to be ready. So take it away, Corey.
Mr. Chair, I'm just going to take over on the screen sharing here. So hopefully you can, there you go, you should be able to see a lovely MMP coffee cup. Thank you very much for inviting me to present you today. I have a few short comments. I want to start with a big thank you to Jennifer and Lucy in the finance team, and Katie on maternity leave as well. We really do appreciate the assistance going through the audit process with us every year. I'll talk a little bit about audit results and audit findings. You do have a draft audit report in your board packages there. Happy to be providing an unmodified opinion. So that is a clean audit opinion. We are satisfied that the financial statements that Ms. Elson just went through are prepared in all material respects in accordance with public sector accounting standards. The last step today is board approval of the financial statements. When we perform our audit, we look at the controls in place to ensure that you're getting accurate financial reporting. We sample transactions throughout the year. We don't look at every transaction. And again, a big thank you to staff, starting in the finance department, but really throughout the other departments as well, because we do check in with other departments, not just finance. The second bullet on this slide is the important one, materiality number. So this is a number that drives our audit testing. We calculate it as roughly 4% of the annual revenues for the year. We test every transaction that's larger than that. So usually that's large capital grants, tax requisition, and capital project expenses. And then underneath that balance, we sample transactions to get ourselves comfort over the financial statements. No limitations placed on the performance of our audit. We had access to all the documents we wanted to see, all the people we wanted to talk to. We didn't find anything unusual, no evidence of conflict of interest or unusual transactions. Again, a reminder that we are not specifically looking for fraud in the context of a financial statement audit. We're not being forensic investigators, but if something came to our attention, I would be required to report it to the board here today. I'll confirm that MMP is independent from January 1st, 2022, all the way through to today, May 9th, 2023. We didn't do any other projects or work with the regional district that would impair my ability to give you an independent audit opinion. So I will stop there, and I would be happy to answer any questions. And I've been pondering Director Harper's questions, so I'll turn it over to you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, and I see Director Harper.
Well, that was a big prod there. So, Corey, it's the third time I see you this year, and your firm works across a number of local governments. So maybe you can even contextualize a little bit what you would say as what you would highlight, or any thoughts on our current financial picture.
Thank you, Director. It's a great question. Comparisons are always tough. I think when you look up and down the island at the communities that I work with, they all have very different things going on, whether there's focuses on large capital projects or other things that that meets the community's needs. I would echo staff's comments that it's really looking at that. How did you perform against budget? How did you perform on providing services and those costs? And then doing some of the capital projects that were on the budget or might be rolling forward into future years. So that's kind of my no answer, is that comparisons are very challenging. Every community is different.
It's a very smooth, evasive answer. Thank you, Corey. Any other questions? Okay. Well, thank you for your time today, and we'll see you next year. And in the room here, we'll take we have a motion for seats. So all those in favor? Great. Okay, and there's a recommendation. Moved and seconded. All those in favor? Great, thank you. And now we're moving to Electoral Areas Service Committee, the minutes for receipt. Moved and seconded. All those in favor? Great. And following that, we have recommendation. Moved and seconded. Any discussion? No. Okay. All those in favor? That's the areas. Great. And that passes. Recommendation number 2. Moved and seconded. No lights on. So that's also the areas. All those in favor? And recommendation 3. All right, moved and seconded. All those in favor? And continuing with the areas, recommendation number 4. Moved and seconded. All those in favor? Oh, sorry, Director Arbor.
Yeah, thanks. I'm just wondering if we got more information on one specific aspect on that one, which I'd requested, which was we had found out that the fire department of Comox was issuing the permit for the Goose Pit area, even though it's outside of their jurisdiction. So my question was whether there had to be any kind of adjustments regarding that for liability purposes.
Thanks, Director. I'll ask Doug DeMarzo, General Manager of Community Services, to try to respond.
Yeah, during the EASC meeting, there were some questions around jurisdiction and the permit for the Comox Valley Fire Department. I think there was a little bit of confusion around the beach boundary versus where they actually protect the area. So the Comox, the fire department can issue a permit for that general area. Once you're below natural tide line, then it's all kind of provincial jurisdiction regardless. So we had some conversations again with the fire chief, and we feel we're in a safe place for him to be issuing the permit, as it's the license of use for recreation, as well as the actual owned land would be the area that he would be protecting. So if the fire emerged up onto the road or into those facilities, that's the land that's protected by the Comox Fire Protection District. I think an email will go out at a later date to update the ASC directors as well on other questions from that conversation.
Okay, thanks very much, Doug. So I believe is moved and seconded recommendation number 4, which is the areas. So all those in favor? Sorry, that's just the areas. But looks like a strong showing by the areas, all in favor. And this is recommendation number 5 to vote for everyone. Any questions or comments? Okay, all those in favor? Awesome. Recommendation 6, also for everyone. Moved and seconded. No lights on. All those in favor? All right, and on to 7. Moved and seconded. All those in favor? That carries. And next we have Sewage Commission minutes. Okay, and all those in favor? Right. Electoral Areas Service Committee, May 8th. We have a recommendation there. All right, moved and seconded. All those in favor? All right, and next is 5, Island Corridor Foundation Financial Commitment Options Analysis. And I'll pass this over to our CAO.
Thank you very much.
Deputy CAO.
Jake Martins, our General Manager of Corporate Services, will be here to introduce this report, and then I think collectively we'll try to answer any questions that the board might have. Jake.
Thank you, James, and through the chair. Yes, this report is provided in full up to the last regular meeting in which the board considered a further report on options respecting the financial commitment with the Island Corridor Foundation. This brief report provides a bit of information on the potential termination of the agreement with the Island Corridor Foundation, and more directly on the potential redirection of those funds to another internal service of the CVRD. The funds were requisitioned in 2013 and the agreement was subsequently entered into in 2014. As the terms of the agreement were never met, those funds have sat in the reserve fund since that time, and they have collected interest. So we've provided their details respecting that, which sums up to around $50,000 in interest, which is accrued. The board has expressed, as I mentioned, an interest in redirecting those funds to another internal service, and staff have confirmed the eligibility for that, provided that the service area boundary mirrors that of the General Administration Service, which is the entire regional district boundary, and that redirection is done by bylaw. We provided in the staff board a table outlining those services that are eligible for this redirection, as well as some of the other ones that may be of interest to the board, but that are not eligible, given those prior conditions. Staff have outlined 3 potential suggestions or candidates around this redirection to services, but certainly we're seeking board direction. And the board could select one or a combination of those, or completely an alternative direction altogether. So with that, Mr. Chair, I'd be pleased to answer any questions.
Thanks so much, Mr. Martins. And we have Dr. Hardy.
Sorry, are we voting on recommendation number 1 right now, or are we just
no
having a
one's moved to
conversation?
recommendation, so we're still on receipt here at this point.
In regards to recommendation number 2, I'd really like to see the 441,000 go towards the search and rescue.
Okay, all right, thanks very much. And next we have Director Hillian.
Thanks, Chair. Just a question about whether or not there was any consideration of returning these funds to taxpayers in some form.
That was identified as one of the 4 options that was provided to the board in the previous staff report. We haven't provided much further analysis on that. Certainly it is eligible, and the board could direct us to undertake that reverse requisition should that be your desire.
Okay, thanks. I'm not in favor of that, but it came up at our council, and I thought I would ask. The other thing I'm wondering about is if there's any pressing need to make this decision right away, and what happens to the funds in relation to this year's budget if we don't assign them right away.
Through the chair, there is no immediate need to provide direction regarding the funds. As the board may recall, our original staff recommendation was to maintain the funds for the time being, given the prospective planning process that the province has proposed. But should the board desire to redirect them now, we will action that.
Thanks very much.
I think maybe I'll just add one piece to that, and that in the current budget, the 308, that the funding is identified for a certain purpose. And I think if the board takes that certain purpose away, then I might look to Lucy or Kevin, but there would be an intent to have the monies noted for something. I don't know that it's wise practice to have funds sitting in the budget with no particular purpose at all. So there would be some follow through, I think, expected from the board to make a commitment.
All right, thank you. And I'll pass it on now to Director Grieve.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. I kind of feel the same way. I mean, there's so many things, beg your pardon, in play right now regarding the ICF. We don't know where we are at. I know that we get very complete updates at this board, but and especially the in-camera ones, but it's sitting in general admin right now, correct? So it's not, it's building a little bit of interest. I would think that I'd rather hold my fire until such time as we can maybe direct that either to trails or rails with trails or something along those lines. We keep hearing about that over and over again. And insofar as channeling your inner Gerald Wally regarding returning money to the taxpayers, it's been so long that I would suggest, not to be macabre here, but I would suggest that many of those ratepayers have either moved on or moved away or passed away. Thank you.
Right, and on that cheerful note, I'm gonna pass it on to Director Grant.
Yeah, I feel a little like we're getting railroaded here. Just kidding. So my question is there any, what are the implications of doing this now? I mean, this is a multi-million-dollar corridor project over the long term, and we're talking about 441,000. Is there going to be any implications or impact towards the corridor as we move? We don't know where we're moving with this, but are there any possible implications if we were to pull this money out now?
Through the chair, we have discussed this matter with the Island Corridor Foundation. They've expressed no reservation or hesitation about the board redirecting these funds. They certainly are not under the impression that these funds are active or the project is about to be implemented in some regard. So no concerns were expressed by the foundation, but appreciate and recognize that there is potential outcomes from the process that could entail redevelopment to restoration of the corridor in some regard.
Great, thanks, Jake. And Director Morin.
Great, thank you. Well, of course, I'm leaning more towards the, sorry, I'm just finding it in the options here. The service 450, the emergency shelter and supportive housing land acquisition. And I guess I'm wondering if we were to move it there, would we be able to access it quickly if we needed to, if some land came along?
Through the chair, I would look to my financial colleagues if there's any reason why we couldn't act on it quickly, but certainly that's my understanding. It would be, again, in order to action this, the board needs to adopt a bylaw to redirect those funds to that service, but pending that, which again shouldn't take months to do, should be accessible fairly soon.
Great, and I see Kevin DeVille popping up, so thanks.
Thank you very much to the chair, to the director. So yeah, I'll just concur with what Jake stated. I mean, as you know, if the directors were wanting to shift this to one or more other services or activities, we could certainly do that. And then, presumably if they went to a service such as the Emergency Shelter Land Acquisition Reserve, once the bylaw was adopted, we would then want to subsequently bring forward a budget amendment to formally bring that into the budget and into the current financial plan. But, post that, then really they would be available, say, if something, did come up that would warrant, an allocation in that regard.
Great. Yeah, I just, because of the nature of that service land acquisition, often those decisions need to be made quickly. So I just wanted to make sure that there would be the ability to do that. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Director Morin. And next, I believe we have Director McCollum.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, well, I'm obviously supportive of recommendation 1 that we make a decision and move ahead, and recognizing that these funds that we've held for quite some time are not likely to be used for the purpose that they were intended for. And I think as a board, we've been very patient in waiting for that process to proceed in hopes of using them to support the rail corridor, which has just not materialized. So if we're not going to make a decision now, like at what point would we ever get to the right day to decide what the other use is if it's not now? Because like I said, I think we've been more than patient. I think as Director Morin suggested, that service 450 is reflective of one of the highest priorities that have been identified in the strategic planning that we've done. It's around potential for housing and housing support, and that's really recognized as one of the biggest challenges that we're facing in our community. So I would certainly be supportive of seeing the funds go to something like that. Although I think another aspect of this discussion is it would be great to have some consensus, because this has been a pretty challenging topic that has a lot of different points of view. And these funds have been paid into by every area in our region. So, none of these options are something I feel like I'm needing to really dig into one over the other. It would just be nice if we could come to some type of agreement around it. I would say my second choice would probably be the regional parks and trails, just because I can really see a connection there on how these monies could then be used to augment transportation options in our community. It would be around active travel or some conservation rather than supporting the corridor for rail purposes. So I just wanted to make those comments. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Director McCollum, and now Director Harbour.
Yeah, thanks. And I don't have concerns around recommendation 1. Regarding recommendation 2, I think we ran into that problem at rural committee yesterday, in that there's not a clear there's just there's 4 things identified, and the thing is we don't have the relative value of the investment right now. We don't have a presentation like what difference would it make to the service. So for example, yes, there's a need about housing, but what would it make a difference in relation to the existing plans for that service? Same for search and rescue. If that 400,000 is the make or break for the project, let's know that, because maybe we would be more inclined. Like, we don't have good parameters for decisions today. So what I would say is, I did hear Jake talk about, or James talk about, it's better if we make a decision so the money doesn't sit in virtual space. But it feels like, my question to staff would be, if we wait a month and for staff to bring back a little bit more flesh rather than a one-line general service to say, here's what the money would do in that particular service, I think it would lead to better decision-making for this board.
Okay, thanks, Director Harbour, and Director Hillian.
Thanks, Chair. I agree. There's a number of moving parts right now. For example, at the City of Courtenay, we're awaiting a staff report on a request from Search and Rescue regarding potential land acquisition. We're also awaiting negotiations that are going on with BC Housing in relation to services for people, housing services for people. And I also think that we've just started the regional parks service, and there's a certain amount of continuity between that and what this money was originally intended for. Beyond that, I voted against this at the last meeting, and I didn't really articulate why. It was primarily because I wanted to see where Comox First Nation stood with the situation with the Island Corridor. I don't know if we've had any dialogue in that regard, but I would certainly be in favor of giving us at least a month to hear more from staff and to see where some of these moving parts might land. Thanks.
Jake, are you able to speak to any discussions with the Comox First Nation?
Yeah, with respect to the engagement agreement that the board talked about 2 weeks ago, there's been no further information from Comox First Nation, but certainly requests have gone out for invitation to participate in any of those meetings, but no more information to provide here.
All right, and so I'll pass it over to Director Grieve.
Yeah, I would concur that we shouldn't rush into this. Yesterday at the EASC, we talked about our growing community funds and how to best spend that money. And it was recognized that the worst thing you can do is do a shotgun approach where you sort of blast away at everything. Rather we have to be, a bullseye bullet to make the most impact that we possibly can. And, you may think 400 grand's a lot of money, but if we talk about property acquisition, stuff like that, it's really not. So I would also be in favor of just holding back and getting a little more depth and a little more perspective on what difference that money would make. Again, I don't think we should be divvying it up in little pieces. I think it should go to something that is core local government services that would make a real difference. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Director Grieve and Director Hardy.
Yeah, thanks. Just a follow-up to Director Hillian's comments there. I guess if we're moving and voting on recommendation 1 in regards to bringing the 441,000 back into the coffers of the CVRD, then whatever decision the Comox First Nation intends with the ICF, I don't think really is relative in regards to how the CVRD would go about spending their $441,000. That's just my thought. So for whatever that's worth, that opinion there.
Okay, and Director Arbor. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Director Grant, sorry.
No, that's fine. He can go first. I'll wait.
Are you sure?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks. It's linked to what Dr. Hardy said. One comment I made that I didn't perfectly articulate it at the time, but I know historically, I mean, an option that is not in this report is to renegotiate the agreement with the ICF or something like that, because I know that historically for a number of years, there's been interest in regards to this station from Comox First Nation and other parties. So you could, that could be another option. I'm not sure if I want to say, let's push it. I think asking for engagement with First Nation or touch base on this is sufficient, but I know that on background, that could be another option that is not currently in the report. I also don't want this to be a year-long exercise, but I think that feedback to just wait a little bit and have a little bit more depth, as Dr. Alien said, would begin.
Director Grant, thanks.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm just wondering, is there any reason why we couldn't kind of just leave it in limbo? Like, I'm just thinking in terms of, all of a sudden a perfect site for a shelter comes up and we could use the money and we've got it, or perhaps it's the perfect park comes up. And if we've already earmarked it, then we don't have the ability to be able to be nimble with the money if we want to.
Through the chair. So speaking a bit to what the deputy CAO outlined, if we were to cancel the grant agreement with the ICF, then the funds would essentially sit there without a defined purpose. So yeah, certainly I think that staff's interest is to make sure that there is some parameters around this funding and where it's kept. And in regards to if it were to remain in the general administration function, but then there was an interest in some sort of supportive housing land acquisition or a regional park, yes, the board could redirect at that time, but until that time, then again, they're sitting there without any purpose identified. And recognizing that in regards to land negotiations, sometimes those things need to be acted on fairly quickly. And it would take a little bit of time as far as just the mechanics of making that transfer in a public meeting through the board, through a bylaw, before those funds could essentially be accessible. So it's not to say it can't be done, but I think there's just a few wrinkles.
Just not seeing any further speakers. Certainly, I think waiting is okay to do, and waiting for a little bit more information, a little bit more depth. I'm not entirely confident that we would have all of the information that the board might be looking for to satisfy all of your interests. Any of the 3 main services that we looked at, I don't know that we'll have all the information for any of those projects to really give you that value proposition, I think was the wording that you used. And so there may still be a lack of clarity around where you may want to put some of those funds. And I don't want to put our financial services colleagues on the spot there around the length of time that this money would sit in general administration without a purpose, but I think it's a general practice and principle that it would have a defined purpose after some length of time. We can certainly come back and report on that. Or Kevin can weigh in sooner than later.
Thanks, Kevin. We're keeping you busy tonight.
Yeah, I think, Kevin, just a sense of that that time in which there's no defined purpose. Is there a best practice around that?
Yeah, I mean, it's always preferable, as already been stated by other staff, that, you know, if we were to decommit the original intent, that it's always a good practice to have it designated for an alternative purpose, just so that we are assuring that we are placing it in the appropriate service. That doesn't mean to say we couldn't leave it in general administration for some point of time, to allow the board to have, you know, further deliberations around what they may ultimately want to use those dollars. But I would certainly recommend that that be done within the current year, just so that we can, you know, kind of nail down where that money then needs to be transferred if so desired.
Great, thanks for that perspective. I see one more light on. Director Harbour.
Yeah, based on this discussion, I could have maybe an alternative second motion, because I don't think, I think what I heard from the CEO is just looking for maybe more specificity around our request, so that we're, you know, the level of depth is better identified. So for me, there's regional parks and trails, we kind of know that would just be money sitting there until some land purchase opportunity arises. So I think the board doesn't need a lot more information on that. In regards to the search and rescue, it would be to know what would that money make in difference to the project, because we've already committed some funds, but would this be a big difference maker to the project, like some sense of scale of an impact? And the third one, same, around the homelessness and the potential land purchase. It looks like I'm not quite aware of what the coordinating councillors are talking about, but if there's opportunities that are coming, just a little bit more information so we can also measure the potential impact, and that's it. And then I think by next month, we would probably be in a position to arrive at some kind of decision. And if there's a touch base with Comox First Nation in the interim, all the better. As our CEO says, it's not the easiest, but if that happens, that would be wonderful. So I don't know if that's helpful for staff to have a little bit more.
Certainly, we can yeah, in respect of the land acquisition and the regional parks, we anticipated that could be seed money, if you will. Both services have reserve funds identified, for that matter. So does the search and rescue reserve service, and there's already a commitment there for funding over the years to the search and rescue fund. So in all three cases, there would be funding provided in some ways seed money, in some ways a little bit more for specific projects. And we can try to we will bring back whatever information we have for subsequent review.
Okay, it's been a great discussion. We're still on receipt. So did you want to speak before receipt on receipt? Okay. And Director Hillian.
Thanks, Chair. I was just going to say that once receipt is done, I'd be prepared to move that we defer both recommendations subject to a staff report as discussed by the board.
Okay, thank you. So we'll just take that vote on receipt. All those in favor? And Director Hillian, did you want to formally make that motion?
Yes, I'll move deferral for sufficient time to allow staff report in relation to this issue.
Okay, we made first and seconded. I see Director McCollum's light on.
Yeah, I'm supportive of deferring recommendation 2, but I'm not totally clear on what more information we're looking for to come back on recommendation 1. So I just want to understand why we wouldn't just vote on that one today.
As mover, did you want to speak on that, Director Hillian, as to why both? Oh, it's only a time and place. Sorry. Thank you. I'm new to this chairing game. Richard, is this to do, Director Hardy, is this to do with time or place?
I guess I would agree with Director McCollum with regards to, you know, do we really need to defer recommendation number 1? I mean, we've had a discussion for a number of months. It sounds like over a number of years. So why not make the decision on recommendation number 1 and then defer number 2?
Well, it seems that the approach, if people wish to do that, would be to defeat this motion, perhaps make a subsequent motion. But prior to that, we have Director Morin. sorry.
No,
Actually, no, sorry.
I was just gonna say
Okay, Director Grantham, slide up.
This is clarifying, does the deferral motion actually include? Is it under recommendation 1? Because if it's not, then that could be separate. Like, was that considered to be within that?
The motion, as I understand it, was to defer both recommendation 1 and recommendation 2. And again, we're strictly on time and place. And Director Hillian,
Well, I realize the motion to defer isn't debatable and belongs to the floor, but if it makes life easier, I'll withdraw it.
Okay, thanks, Director Hillian. Did you want to make a subsequent motion? Okay. And seconded. Any speakers on that? So that's recommendation 1. All those in favor? Okay, any opposed?
Another 10 years.
And that carries. And any further recommendations, Director Hillian?
Yeah, I'll move that we defer recommendation 2 subject to a staff report and for such time as required for that report.
Okay, that's being moved and seconded. All those in favor? Okay, any opposed? And that passes unanimously. Excellent. So we'll now move on to the 2022-2026 financial plan amendment bylaw number 737 for receipt. Okay, moved and seconded, and I'll pass it over to Kevin at the podium.
Thank you very much. Through the acting CEO to the chair to the directors. Good afternoon. So the staff report and accompanying bylaw in front of you today is the formalized annual roll-up of all of the budget amendments approved in the previous fiscal year, in this case being the 2022-2026 financial plan. A total of 14 budget amendments were approved throughout 2022, with each of these highlighted in the first couple of pages of the bylaw that's in your package. And all of those various budget amendments were approved whether by the CVRD board or the solid waste board or other delegated authorities such as the Rec Commission, Sewage Commission, etc. While the annual budget bylaw must be adopted prior to March 31st each year, there is no legislated deadline for when the amending budget bylaw needs to be done. So we are bringing that forward to you now. And part of that rationale is to ensure that the adoption of this bylaw also creates alignment with our 2023-2027 financial planning bylaw, which of course the board adopted back on March 21st of this year. So I'm certainly here to answer any questions you may have with respect to any of the amendments that are included in the bylaw, but certainly staff are seeking the board's willingness to undertake first, second, and third reading this evening, and then subsequently fourth reading and adoption at the next board meeting.
All right, I'm not seeing any lights on, so perhaps we'll vote on receipt. So all those in favor? Okay, and the recommendation? Moved and seconded. Anyone wish to speak on that? Okay, all those in favor? And none opposed? All right, and now we'll move to bylaws and resolutions for first, second, and third reading.
Move first and second for 737.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. All those in favor? Thank you. And third has been firsted and seconded, and that's all the numbers. And all those in favor? Okay. And then we have we're on to now to new business. Okay. All those in favor? Okay, and move to requested action. Second. Does anyone wish to speak to this? Okay, all right. And people do just a second. Director Hardy.
Yeah, I just say we get on with it, and I'll come to a consensus that Daniel Arbor should be running for the FCM.
Excellent. Okay, so it sounds like we've got consensus around the table. Director Grieve, if you'd like to add to the consensus?
Well, further to that, I actually believe that Director Arbor should run for third vice because he's going to have to wait another 6 years to get that chance to come around again. So
I believe that nominations have closed for that, but Director Arbor.
Yeah, thanks for raising that. And we actually, I'm quite supportive of our third vice president. That's Rebecca Blyas, Vancouver City Councillor, and she spent a lot of energy on issues around mental health and the drug crisis around Vancouver. And I think she's pushed that really well at the federal level as well. So I think we're well represented for BC. I'd also like to mention that I believe there's somebody else to vote for coming out of the city of Courtenay potentially. So it's been great to have Will Cole Hamilton also come to pretty much all the board meetings since last year. So I hope that we both get in and that we can represent the interests of the valley going forward.
All right. Well, that would be a pleasure. So, but calling the question, all those in favor? Thank you. And I think at this point, before we go in camera, we're perhaps going to take a recess for some food. So we'll just adjourn at this point. 22.